Shall we parlay?
I'm gonna say yes. I don't know what that means, but sure.
You just mentioned Pirates of the Caribbean and you don't know what parlay means?
But I thought that in that movie was you can negotiate
Yeah,
or
it's
something.
pirate law. Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, parlay. I need a parlay. I need to talk.
Oh,
Anywho,
so it's just talking.
I don't really know what it is, but they said it
I
a
don't
lot in Pirates of the Caribbean, so
know.
I felt like it was good for our conversation. So,
All right.
Monkish,
Yep.
second episode. New format.
Yep.
Whatever this website is that we're using, we're on the height of technology here at Monkish. We are cutting
No,
edge. Only the best for us.
we shouldn't lie to people. That's not
No.
true.
But we don't know what we're doing, but
It's
we're
not
having
even
fun.
remotely
We're
true.
having a good time.
Yeah, we're still doing the thing.
We're
It's
still doing
fine.
the thing. And look at this, episode 2. And if this gets published, I mean, that's 2 episodes.
That's
I think we can close up shop and say we did it.
yep.
We had a
More
podcast
than
for a
enough.
minute, and it was a good run. We had a good run, 2 episodes.
It was exhausting.
I think we
It's
changed a
really
lot of
exhausting.
minds and a lot of hearts,
We really fixed the economy and the world.
especially the economy. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's doing great.
number
There are no
one,
wars anywhere.
no,
Peace,
absolutely
justice.
no wars. Yep, we've achieved complete peace, and we don't really even need to talk about this next topic that we're discussing today, which is asceticism, because basically we've achieved it. We're done.
Yeah, we're done.
Nothing more to do in our
We're all
spiritual
maxed
life.
out.
Maybe
All
somebody
right,
else has
well,
work to do, but I'm done. I'm good.
goodbye, I guess. I mean,
Yep, it was fun.
that was
No, but
good.
seriously, today we're talking asceticism and all things that are related to asceticism in Christianity and religion, but particularly in our Christian context, and especially in this season of Lent, as we are, as Christians, fasting and being more intent about our prayer. So, asceticism. Do you want to maybe define that for us? Because I'm a big dummy and that's a big word. So, asceticism.
Well,
What are we dealing with here?
my very menial reading on the subject suggests that it comes from a Greek term that originally just referred to like ascesis, like exercise, literally physical exercise
Hmm.
is what the word, like the root word meant. And then it eventually became associated with like the type of exercises that philosophers and people in religious groups would undertake,
Mm.
particularly the ones that had to do with groups adopting things like celibacy or like voluntary poverty and like stuff like that. Like the Essenes,
Mm.
all of these sort of early groups that were defined first as like ascetics before you had the narrative of monks,
Mm. Hmm.
right? So that's kind of the root of it. And I mean, what's interesting about that is there are so many layers to that throughout history about like why did people do this stuff? Like why commit yourself to living kind of a miserable life?
Hmm.
Like why would you do that? Why would you go up to a pillar and just be up there in front of like the wind and the hail and the rain and the sun and expose yourself to the elements and eat very little and stuff like that? Like there was a bunch of stuff going on and that was under this banner of asceticism throughout
Hmm.
history. And the motivations were, and I think continue to be, like pretty varied.
Right. Well, there's a lot of practices you just touched on there, which was fasting, or, I think of the old hagiographies of the saints where they put on a hair shirt, just the most uncomfortable, bristly shirt, and just wear it all day just to get that extra bit of physical pain or whatever it was. But yeah, all those practices that were, yeah, not desirable practices. I mean, we get hungry and we try to satiate our hunger, but fasting is not that. Fasting's the complete opposite. It's refraining from, maybe even sitting in our hunger. And so, yeah, there are a lot of practices involved when we talk about asceticism, when we talk about those spiritual exercises. And you pointed out a lot of those were in the early church, these somewhat radical religious who were trying to live a maybe more intense spiritual life or do exercises that were a bit more intense. But I'm kind of interested, we touched on some of these early groups, but asceticism is really a part of our tradition going back to our scripture. We hear in our scriptures, especially this time during Lent, I mean, it's all over our readings at Mass, which is about the type of fasting we're supposed to be doing, the type of prayer, the kinds of practices we as Christians should do, like bringing our gifts to the altar. Before we do that, should we examine ourselves? So all of those practices also are part of this tradition we talk about as asceticism. But I'm interested to kind of start and focus on that early tradition of our scriptures, because the Old Testament or the Hebrew scriptures have a lot to say about the type of fasting and the type of ascetical practices we're supposed to be doing, but also why we're supposed to be doing them. And I didn't know if you wanted to go in on that, or you had a particular scripture or part of scripture that highlights what asceticism is for you.
Yeah, I don't know if I have I think I have the general sort of passages in Isaiah in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about this anyways, but because we were gonna talk about it here. But there was a conversation I had earlier today, actually, with a Presbyterian minister, and he was mentioning because he kind of likes going into all of the historical stuff, and just talking about how during the period wherever Isaiah or the major prophets, well, specifically Isaiah, where we have these writings that kind of refer to a turn from the kind of devotional ritualism that went with the temple, and a focus more on acts of charity and justice as acts of asceticism or as acts of worship. But really I think that it fits as asceticism or penitential acts, right?
Yeah.
Like the whole rend your heart, not your garments, and that sort of thing. That it was a way to also democratize the practices that previous to the exile were actually all kind of centered around the temple, and that in the temple it was actually more a matter of you go through the sort of what's established in the ritual, and you can get the sacrifices and all that stuff, and the priests can do all their thing. But then in this exilic period, there's a more of a, like I said, more of a democratized view that goes, well, okay, we don't have that anymore right now, but you can serve your neighbor.
Mm.
You can serve the most vulnerable in society, and you should be doing that instead of trying to sort of go into this sort of more devotional type of stuff. Which is, I think, going back to what we were saying before, kind of part of the tension that exists in when we talk about asceticism too, in general, like Christian asceticism, that it can be kind of a sort of devotional practice.
Yeah.
That really serves no other purpose than personal piety. I mean, you mentioned the whole wearing a hair shirt
Mm-hmm.
or things like that. I'm not saying that those things are completely all of that is illegitimate or something.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something within the tradition or within the way that it's explored in Scripture that in the Old Testament and in the New Testament too, we see it kind of going, okay, you want to go beyond the surface level stuff, and you really want to ask yourself, am I being transformed by this? Am I being changed? It really has to go deeper
Yeah.
than that.
I think that's the key, your personal transformation. That's what this is about. I think a lot of ascetical practices, especially when I see trends like Exodus, what is it, Exodus 90? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know what you're
It's
talking about.
basically like a challenge of things to do during this time of Lent. And it includes things like fasting Wednesdays and Fridays, I think. It includes things like not listening to music. Like it has all these things built into it, like dopamine reduction, basically. And I'm not bringing it up to kind of dig on it, but I do think a lot of these become like tests of endurance. Like,
Yeah.
how much can I endure? How long can I go without food? Or how long can I go not doing X, Y, or Z? And again, I think, all of that is fine, but that's ultimately not the point of doing any of those things. It's not to see kind of your feats of endurance, but it should be focused on something. And I think when we talk about scripture, especially in this Lenten season, as we're hearing these passages, especially from Isaiah, we've already mentioned, scripture is pretty clear about why we're supposed to be doing these things, or the kind of quality of sacrifice we're supposed to be making. And ultimately, God says in Isaiah very plainly that the kind of fasting and the kind of sacrifice God's asking for is not this kind of literal doing a burnt offering or something like that, this kind of very formalized ritual. But it's exactly what you're saying. It's, what is your relationship with your neighbor? What is your relationship with the poor, with the oppressed, with the forgotten and the abandoned? So I think with all of our ascetical practices, I think you're right. We can get into this trap where it's kind of still about us and not about others. It's still me focused and what I can achieve instead of things that I need to let go of, because holding on to them too tightly has prevented me from loving my neighbor fully. And so that's something I think scripture, like I've been hearing the readings this season a lot clearer and just being challenged by them. Because I think there is a point where endurance is hard to endure, like any kind of challenge, especially like a physical challenge. I also think it's really hard to endure in preserving relationships. And I know this because I'm terrible at preserving my relationships. Like, seriously, I'll get texts from a good friend, and it gives me anxiety, like, oh, I gotta be a good friend and reply. But that's just with people that are in our lives. What about all those people who are not in our lives? The people that God is calling us to kind of stretch ourselves and go to and repair relationships, answer to injustice. I think that is also hard to endure. That's hard to even start. It's easy never to do that and think, "Oh, I'm doing all the other things. I'm doing my fasts, or I'm giving money to charity or doing alms." And it's very easy to just not go the extra mile and actually repair relationships. So, yeah. So, I think scripture has a lot to say about this. And Jesus has a lot to say about this as well.
Yeah, and I think with Jesus, you see it fleshed out in a way that is, well, I mean, for his time, it was obviously very controversial because he was seen as like kind of an affront to the established religious authorities. And you see this exchange between him and the established authorities of the time,
Mm.
where they kind of try to go, well, do you even like do you take the rules seriously? Like,
Mm-hmm.
are you, you know, because he contrasts the two, and he kind of goes like the healings on the Sabbath day.
Mm.
You know, that's something that was pretty well established in the law,
Mm-hmm.
and he kind of puts love of neighbor above the whole don't do the certain things
Yeah.
on the Sabbath. So again, I feel like when we look at the scripture, honestly, you do kind of have to acknowledge that that's the central takeaway when it comes to these practices. But it was interesting that you mentioned that they can also be sort of ways that I can take into account how maybe I'm grasping too tightly to certain things, and that is like an impediment to my relationships.
Hmm.
And that could be like what you were talking about, like interpersonal relationships that we have in our daily lives, or like a larger sort of societal thing.
Yeah.
And my disposition maybe in that context.
Hmm.
And it always makes me remember like the whole egg analogy, the idea that in any talk of like an ascetical practice, whether it's in Christianity or in Buddhism or in any tradition that has asceticism in it, usually like the major religions that have like some ascetical tradition are not going to say to the people practicing this, whether they're like monks or nuns or priests or whatever,
Hmm.
they're usually not going to say, okay, so you're supposed to fast, so just stop eating until you die.
Hmm.
That's not really how it works. It's something that tries to take into account this thing that is acknowledged as good, and then it tries to provide like some middle way of not, like you said, grasping too tightly to this
Hmm.
thing. And I bring up the egg thing because it's like the analogy that I would use, like when I had the theology students, I would say, okay, it's like if you hold an egg, you're holding it just enough for you to actually grasp it and not to slip,
Yeah.
and like fall. But you're actually not holding it so tightly that it just kind of breaks in your hand.
Hmm.
So there's this kind of middle thing that you're doing
Right.
when you're doing that. And I think there's this attempt that we do really daily to try to do that with all of these things that we're talking about, whether it's food or
Hmm.
relationships even, all of these things we can grasp a little too tightly, but we can
Hmm.
also kind of let them slip. And you know and I think it's a call to kind of abide some in some healthy middle.
Hmm. That's a good analogy. I've never heard that before. Our formator used to say, we hold each other's stories with trimmed fingernails because we don't want to like claw too deeply and then risk tearing or shredding. But you're also right, we can hold a little too loosely too sometimes, which I might be guilty of as well, the loosely part. I think for me, like, Jesus is such a great example of somebody who does all of these practices that we're talking about. He goes to the desert to be alone, to pray. He fasts. Um, he fulfills obligations of the law on him. So he does all of these things, but even in like our gospel this Sunday, we're filming this on the fourth Sunday of Lent, and we get these readings. Are they the same in your lectionary?
Well,
It's
go
the
ahead.
healing of the blind.
Yep, it's the same one.
Yeah. So we have that where Jesus, it's not the right day, but ultimately, what is all of this for? Like, it's to heal people. It's to do good. Doing good can't possibly be unlawful. It doesn't matter what day it is. So I think Jesus is a great example of somebody who fasts, who prays, who does ascetical practices, who denies his own self. But I do think Jesus is also a great example of somebody who knows what the focus is all about. It's about the poor. It's about the oppressed. It's about the downtrodden. One of my friar formator, well, he wasn't my formator, but he taught us a few classes in our first year. His name's Vince Cushing. Was an excellent professor in post Vatican II, and everything that came from the council. But he had a great phrase that Isaiah was the it was basically like the spiritual playbook of Jesus. It was Jesus's spirituality. And we kind of see that in the Gospels. Jesus is frequently quoting Isaiah. And so Jesus's imagination is kind of that prophetic imagination. And I love that line in Isaiah. We hear it during Lent, but where he says, the kind of fasting I want is this, to remove the chains of oppression and the yoke of injustice, to feed the hungry, to house the homeless. That's the kind of fasting the Lord wants. And yes, we can and should fast on Fridays and do your own personal fasts. Pick those things that you feel are holding you back. Do all of that. If we're not focused on that central thesis that like this is the true fasting, it's to free the oppressed, then I think we start to lose something, and Lent risks becoming kind of this trite practice that every year, we have our thing, and it's always fun hearing what people are going to give up and what they're going to do. But I think we need to have some, as a church, some communal sense of the kind of fasting that God is asking of us as a church, to focus on who are the oppressed, who are those who are under the yoke of slavery still, who are the hungry, and how can we find them this season. So that would be kind of my perspective on Jesus. Is he's a man of great ascetical practices, but one who's focused on what matters.
Yeah, I think well, you mentioned the fasting on Fridays thing,
Hmm.
and I think in my church it's a little more flexible. So if you're listening and you're an Episcopalian, you don't necessarily have to do that.
Yeah.
Um, but actually, even with the Roman Catholic Church, I think the official like fasting is like you skip a meal, right?
Yeah, I think it's the kind of equation they've been using is like two
Yeah,
small
it's like
meals or one big
yeah,
meal, you know?
it's something like one meal or two small meals that don't add up to what something like that.
Right. That add up to less than one full meal, basically.
Right.
Yeah. And that's where my personality, like, I think a lot of that is some spiritual quantum mechanics that, like, you just can't compute. What is two small meals? I don't know. I always get into this with the friars because, and it's a tradition in many homes and many places, but doing soup for our common meals. Typically, like in a friar, it'd be Friday because that's the day you should fast. But here at St. Francis Inn, we have a communal meal on Monday. So during Lent, we do a soup for that meal on Monday. But to me, I kind of have to laugh because I've been in friaries before where it's like, oh, it's soup Friday because it's Lent, but then they'll be like, but we have lobster bisque and clam chowder and
I was gonna
fresh
say that.
bread from wherever, and it's like, this is delicious. Like, what are you talking? This isn't sacrifice. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
So
that's
it's like, I've always said to the friars, I said, what we really should do is on Fridays, we should all walk down to the 7-Eleven and you can get anything you want. You can even get meat if you want. But your dinner is from the 7-Eleven. Like, we need to experience what it's like to only be able to afford a taquito at 7-Eleven and be like, wow, that sucks. That's my only option. And it's
yeah.
not,
Eat,
oh, I get to eat my lobster bisque on Friday. Like, come on.
eat like you're in a food desert, like millions of people in America,
Exactly.
and that's probably going to be even more of an actual sacrifice than
Oh,
having
yeah.
lobster.
Yeah, you get these old guys who are like, I got to eat a taquito and a French toast stick for dinner. Like, yep, that's what you're eating.
Yeah, it's like you're not going to find a lot of fresh produce and
Oh,
like
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's, I think we can still be creative in the ways we are doing these kinds of practices that still help us focus on what's really important, where Jesus says he is, which is in the poor. He literally identifies himself with the poor. If you see somebody hungry, if you see someone naked, if you see someone without a home, when you meet those people, you are meeting Jesus. So how you act with them and how you relate to them matters. But how about a little bit about like your religious life journey, and I don't know whether the Norbertines are now or how have those traditions expressed asceticism? How do you live it today in your own tradition?
Yeah, I think Because I've had a bit of a, well, a weird trajectory because I wasn't really raised in the Roman Catholic Church and I wasn't raised in the Episcopal Church. I was raised in a kind of like Mexican immigrant evangelical like Pentecostalism.
Hmm.
And although there isn't any like religious life or any form of monasticism in that tradition, there is a lot of talk of like ascetical practices, and so I do remember those growing up. Now, what I now looking back on it, what I think is interesting is I think in that community that I was in, there was a tendency to kind of recreate what is actually like a very medieval concept
Mm.
of the function of asceticism, or at least the natural result of asceticism. And I would say medieval, but that's kind of vague because I think it goes back further than that. And I mean, just to like put it out there, what I mean is this idea that if you engage in certain practices, like prolonged fasting or really intense prayer or something like that, like really like renunciative practices,
Hmm.
like you really go into the deep end, that you are going to have superpowers,
Mm.
basically, is the principle. And I mean, it's Pentecostalism, so there was already a lot of like supernaturalism in there.
Sure.
A lot of talk about like the work of the Holy Spirit and like speaking in tongues and like all that sort of thing. But I remember that it really, that was kind of the function of, uh, like, I remember fasting a lot.
Hmm.
I remember fasting to a degree at some point that I was like, now looking back on it, I was like, that was unhealthy.
Mm.
Like, that wasn't good.
Hmm.
But the idea behind it was that, like, the more that you deny the flesh, it was kind of a dualism. Like, the more that you deny the flesh, the more, like, oh, your, like, spiritual strength is gonna
Hmm.
increase.
Yeah.
And I think even in the sayings of the Desert Fathers, there's one of those that's there that says something like, if you do X, Y, and Z, like people are known to be able to like control like wild beasts or something like
Mm.
that.
Mhm.
Like it would say something like, oh, if you do this, you'll get this power or
Yeah.
something like that. And I think we see that in the hagiographies too, the fact that these saints did all of these sort of renunciative things and then they can bilocate and they can be in two
Hmm.
places at once now and they can, stuff like that. But I feel like that was my sort of beginning encounter with that was, okay, so you do asceticism because the world is basically dualistic and you need to deny the flesh to like have more strength in the spirit, and strength in the spirit means like supernatural stuff is going to
Hmm.
happen, like that sort of thing. I think when I had my like falling away from that, like my crisis of faith and all that, I was very skeptical of anything, any kind of supernatural claims.
Mm.
And I don't feel like I ever fully committed in my mind to like a complete like disavowing of all forms of asceticism.
Hmm.
But it was definitely a period of time where I was kind of like, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
And I think that's when I was over at the Sarah House.
Hmm.
I was kind of questioning it. And it was different in the Roman Catholic Church, I think, because it's a lot more like tied to a certain kind of ecclesiastical legalism. Like what we just talked about, fasting doesn't just mean like in Pentecostalism, fasting like frequently did mean you would not eat anything and you would
Hmm.
not drink anything,
Yeah.
like not even water, like you wouldn't do
Yeah.
anything. And in Catholicism, it's a little bit more measured and a little bit
Hmm.
more like, no, 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 no. Here's the official definition of this, and this is how
Yeah.
this works, like that sort of thing. And this is when we do it. And like it was more prescribed, and I was like,
Hmm.
okay, sure, you do the practices that are there. Um, but I feel like it became more of a like I really needed to internalize, especially when it comes to like discerning like a commitment to like the monastic life. I feel like I needed to internalize the practices, like their deeper meaning, Like I
Hmm.
really see something in it that I felt that I was like, okay, this is a way that I feel that God is calling me to more genuinely like live out the gospel in this particular way.
Hmm.
And I think obviously like one of the big ones was celibacy and kind of going through that uh, like wrestling.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've ended up in a, and we've talked about this, in a place where I do feel like that is the way that I'm called to live it out.
Hmm.
But in my tradition now, I have like in the community I belong to, people that are married are
Hmm.
in the community, and they're not like oblates or associates. They're like fully members of the community.
Yeah.
I don't think that they're like less legitimate members or something if they're not celibate. I think, again, I had to kind of internalize the practices in a way that was genuine to me, like that I felt was a genuine way to live them out, and that was also not like an ego boost for me.
Hmm.
Is I kind of did, especially in like the Roman Catholic system, kind of feel that,
Yeah.
and I feel like now it's way different because I know how I'm living them out, but at the same time, I just don't feel like I'm like placed on a pedestal as much as I was as a Roman Catholic.
Mm.
So, I mean, that's how I would put it. We can sort of flesh this out more because I'm sure you have your own sort of perspective on it. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, just like you, I think my own practices and my own perspective on everything we've talked about has evolved over years. I mean, you've known me for over 10 years now. So my kind of perspective has shifted a lot and kind of, I think, goes up and down with a lot of this. I think when I was growing up, I was very serious about like fulfilling the obligations, and that's what I thought was important, which was fine. I think that's where everyone kind of starts. You have to do the thing. You have to fast on the certain days, or you have to do whatever. And I even remember, I attribute this more to my being a smart aleck than being something like a saint. But I remember me being an altar server. I lived a block from the church in my home parish, so I would always be called for the special events, like not, I mean, the normal Sunday masses, but like for Stations of the Cross. Well, I lived right there, so I was going to help serve the Stations of the Cross. And I remember it was one of the first times I had done it, and the priest at the time said, when we go around the whole church. I was holding the cross, and it's this giant metal crucifix. And, I'm a little kid. So he's like, when we go to each station, a lot of servers will just rest it on their foot so it's not touching the ground. And so that you can take a little break. Because it's going to take a little bit. It's going to take maybe 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes. So in my mind, I was like, you know what? I'm going to hold this cross because Jesus told us to carry our crosses. So I'm going to hold this cross the whole time. And it was like me as a little kid, like gripping this cross, not letting it down. And then I told the priest that. He said something like, "Oh, did you, was it hard? Did you give it a rest?" I said, "Didn't you hear? Like, Jesus said to carry our crosses. I carried it the whole way," or something. Again, smart aleck, not a saint. And I come to find out, like a year or two later, that priest had made all the altar servers after that carry the cross the whole time. So I screwed
You
everyone
screwed
after
him
me.
over. Yeah.
I screwed them over so bad. But that, I think, like in my kid imagination, like, again, it's the endurance aspect. So to me,
Right.
fasting and prayer and asceticism was all about kind of what I can endure for Jesus. But I really think that only gets you so far. It only got me so far. And I think I became very disenchanted by a lot of those practices when I got to Bonaventure, when I got to college. I still was exploring, like, how do I fast and how do I do a lot of these things, or even my devotional practices. I don't consider myself a highly devoted person in the sense like I have a lot of devotionals, like saying the rosary or the Stations of the Cross. And so even then, sometimes I I have this feeling, it's wrong, but I have this feeling like I'm not doing enough, or I'm not serious enough about this, about asceticism or about my own penitential life. And so for me, I think those college years were a bit of like soul searching, of feeling very cynical about unhealthy practices of fasting. I heard the stories in religious life. The idea of asceticism was whipping yourself. I mean,
Right.
literally, friars, other religious orders, would, people in formation, being trained to be a friar, like, would go to your rooms and you'd be expected to beat yourself for God knows what. And then you'd hear, whatever, ropes or belts. But people were just hitting their bed or something. They weren't actually hitting themselves, but maybe they did if they, enjoy that kind of thing. But nobody was beating themselves. And so I would hear those stories and be like, that's all insane. Like, I don't believe in
Right.
any of that. And so even someone like St. Francis, when I first encountered the Franciscan tradition, I much preferred people like Bonaventure and Scotus. Francis was kind of too extreme for me. I was like, this guy's nuts. Like, and if you read like some of the Franciscans afterwards, like Angela of Foligno, I mean, these are not well people. I mean, they're saints and they're great. They're holy people. But there was a level where their ascetical practices were not healthy. And I would not recommend anybody to do them. You had Angela Foligno literally being so extreme and so zealous that she would drink the water that they would use to clean the sores from lepers.
Yep.
That's not healthy. So okay, so a good dose of skepticism, I think, in my college years. But I think for me, in the Franciscan tradition, Saint Francis really actually brought me back to thinking more about these practices in a healthier way, even though sometimes Francis himself was unhealthy in his practices. He says at the end of his life that he should have treated his body better. He called it brother ass, but he's talking about his body. And I should have, I shouldn't have been as harsh to my body. I should have treated my body better. But Francis, like for the Franciscans, we don't talk so much about asceticism. I mean, we do, but day to day, no. But what we do talk about quite frequently is penance, which I think is pretty much synonyms, because Francis was a part of that movement at the time, his time was the penitential movement, was typically, again, lay people who did some public act of penance for something they did, and would be known in the community as somebody who is going through a period of penance and doing these acts of extra prayers, extra fasting. Again, very public. Francis basically becomes one of these people, one of these lay public penitents who would be in the church. People would know, yeah, that's the penitent or whatever. Well, so Francis's whole kind of religious imagination is penance. Well, he tells us exactly what his version of penance is, or how he defines penance. If you read in his last testament that the Lord led him to do penance in this way, that when he was in sin, it seemed bitter for him to see lepers, which was true. He hated lepers. But then the Lord led him among them. He had mercy with them, and what was bitter to him had been turned to sweetness. And so you have Francis literally saying, hey, penance is not just doing crazy stuff to your body. It's not just malnourishing yourself or praying all throughout the night or rolling in snow and thorns. It's none of those things. What it really is who are those people who are marginalized, oppressed, who you even hate, who you can't possibly imagine relating to. And then penance is you going among them and living with them and being a part of their life. That's what I mean by that's, I think, way harder to do than any trial of endurance. I think it's far easier to give up whatever for 40 days than it is to make a life-changing decision to live among people that society hates, that your parents hate, I mean, that's challenging. I'm challenged by that. I don't like, I still every day think I'm not quite doing it yet. There's this part after Francis says that where he says, and then I lingered a while, and then I left the world. And my teacher in the novitiate, Mike Blastic, he loved that. He's like, I lingered a while. What does that mean? And I think the more I'm 7 years into this Franciscan formation, and I think like that's what I've been doing for 7 years. I've been in that kind of lingering stage, and maybe the next 50 years or whatever. But it's that point where you like realize I gotta maybe change my ways a little bit. And maybe you're even making changes, but you are like struggling through it. You're still kind of leaning on those old habits. Maybe you go back every now and again, but you're kind of lingering, but you're moving towards that goal of penance. So anyways, the very long kind of tangent of my story, but to me, like, asceticism is about our life of penance, of turning back to God, and the way we do that, at least in the Franciscan tradition, is by going out and living with and among and serving with and among those people who, like the scriptures tell us, are oppressed and who need justice. So,
Yeah, and I would add too, from the perspective of like a spirituality that is at least the one that I've had throughout formation in religious life has been more rooted in like monasticism.
mm-hmm,
And we talked about, I think in the first episode we talked about how, and I'm still convinced that the terms that develop over history about like the differences between friars and canons and monks and so on are not really that like significant, but they they do delineate like a type of spirituality that has to do with like these particular movements. And I think in my experience of it, and I mean this was a period of time where I was in contact with you because I think you can recall like my novice master passed away
mm-hmm,
in a car accident while I was in formation.
yeah,
And I remember that you know, you get to know the people that you live with,
mm-hmm,
especially if you're in a monastery, because you're like, you know, you guys get sent to different friaries and stuff. And then if you commit to one place, the idea is you're going to be there with those people. And even when the monastery that I was like, I still go back there like once a month and I pray with them and I
yeah,
visit with them and everything. So you get to know the people there. And I had gotten to know him pretty well and everything. And it was an experience where, because of the fact that the abbey is where it is on this mesa, and you lived in Laguna Pueblo, and it's kind
mm-hmm,
of like the same type of like desert, you know, it was hard to get like a bulldozer to where the cemetery was.
mm-hmm,
So I spent a while out there digging the grave with a few other people. And then, you know, we had the mass, and it was very odd because it kind of was a way of going through the motions of what we did every day, but he was there, like in his coffin, and it was a completely different light to those things.
mm-hmm,
And then I remember after we buried him, there was a time I went back to my room, to my cell, and I was like, he did it. Like that's asceticism.
mm-hmm.
He did the whole thing, and he until it was over. So to me, it speaks to a spirituality that I try to live out still. That is more, you know, there's a certain monotony to the things that you commit to. There's a certain sort of repetitiveness and a kind of almost like a boring, like not very flashy life that
Yeah.
you live. The asceticism sometimes is just in going forward with it
Mm.
and trying to do that to the end.
Yes, I think that's really beautiful. Again, bringing in Mike Blastic, it reminds me what he taught us about Francis is that it wasn't all of those stories about Francis, rolling in thorns or wearing a hair shirt, Mike Blastic would say some of that historically is probably not accurate. Because what ultimately was the struggle for friars? Well, it was their life. It was literally the way of life they chose. They didn't have to do extra things like wear a hair shirt. They already gave up their home and all their clothes. Like, that was already the thing. Mobily, without a solid anchor of like a home, that was part of the thing. That was part of their asceticism. But ultimately what it boils down to is like the life they chose to live and living it authentically and fully. And I think that's what you're describing, like with your novice master, with that whole experience. If we're living our life genuinely and authentically, we are going to be experiencing struggles. And hopefully we do that, with grace, with God's grace, and God's help. But that's the life. I think for me as a Franciscan, it boils down to the life. And there is enough anguish in this world. We don't have to create more.
Yeah, you don't really have to look for the suffering to
Right.
like inflict it upon yourself. You will get it. Like, don't worry. You
Yes.
know, it'll
Yes.
definitely be there,
You
no
know.
matter what your commitments happen to be.
Yep. Yep. It's going to be there. Just to share a quick story, this is kind of exactly where we wanted to be anyways, talking about signs of the times and
Oh
where
yeah.
we are now as a community of Christians, but as a society. I had been craving a gyro for like weeks. I didn't know why. I know they're called Heroes, but I can't not call them gyros. So anyways, please forgive me. But I was just craving one of these things. And I happened to be in Collingswood, New Jersey, looking for records just for fun. And right across the street, I saw this restaurant, Jersey Kebab. I said, perfect. They gotta have them. So I go in. It's this delightful Turkish cafe. Everyone in there is so hospitable. They're giving me complimentary tea, giving me recommendations, giving me a little baklava with my coffee. I'm like, this place is amazing. And I'm noticing on the wall there's this artwork in Arabic and underneath whatever it said in English. And then it dawned on me, I'm like, this is a Muslim owned business. And it was this Turkish cafe, so it makes perfect sense. And then I'm hearing things like, it's the 1 year anniversary. I said, oh, 1 year anniversary of what? That sounds so positive and exciting. Well, it was the 1 year anniversary that their restaurant was raided by ICE. It
Oh,
was one of the first in our area, in the Philly, New Jersey area, that was like kind of public news. Because here you have this Muslim family who have been immigrants in this country, legal residents, and have been working on getting their citizenship for 10 years now, who own a business and who were some of the most hospitable people I've ever met. And here I'm touching the story where they were impacted by the actions of our administration, and the whole community was reeling from this event. It was a couple who had owned this restaurant, and the son was the one who was serving me that day. But it just blew my mind that I'd been craving this gyro, and then I found myself in this restaurant, and it just happened to be the day, a year to the day, that ICE had raided them. And I cannot tell you how many community members walked into that restaurant just to check in with them. And like, they knew their names. They would talk about each other's lives and then leave. And for me, like, another light clicked. It's Ramadan. And as I'm gorging myself with this delicious food, they're fasting. And not only are they fasting, and not only were was a serious injustice done to them a year to the day, but as I was leaving, I noticed they have a giant sign in their window that says anyone who is homeless, has a disability, or simply can't pay will have a free meal. That to me like encapsulated what we're talking about. It is the element of fasting, of spiritual practices. It's the element of the oppressed, injustices happening. And then it's this notion of like just the absolute generosity of spirit and joy that these people exuded despite all of these things. And also despite their fasting. So, like, to me, that experience really just embodied what we're talking about. Because, like you said, you do not have to look far. I wasn't even trying to look, and I found it. So, we have so many things going on in our world today, and so many people who need penance.
For sure, yeah.
Called to penance. And I think that's what St. Francis and penitents were doing back in the day. They were calling others to a life of self reflection, to a life of penance, and to a life of conversion, of changing your behaviors. I think we need a new penitential movement, especially in the United States, where we call Christians and others, especially people in power, to some conversion. We're in deep need of that right now, I fear. I don't know how you're feeling about all of that, but
Well, obviously, I agree. I think it makes me think of, well, the thing that we talked about in the last episode about like the complicated early history of monasticism and how before you had the narrative of what we now associate as like the monastic movement in Egypt,
mm-hmm,
you already had a movement of ascetics that were mostly in towns and
mm-hmm,
villages and cities. And I think there's always something in people taking on that kind of life, whatever the outward sort of practices are,
mm-hmm,
that, like you're saying, it always speaks to the sort of thing that's happening in society at the time. And it's always a kind of a prophetic call to the believers, really, to go, hey, maybe we've lost the plot a bit about what we are really about, what this is.
yeah,
And I think for us now in the United States, it just is very clear. This is again my opinion that Christianity can become a way for us to just build empires and
mm-hmm,
boost our egos and slap a cross or a God bless whatever on stuff,
yeah,
and that's Christianity somehow, and you can ignore all of the things that Jesus actually preached.
yeah,
You can ignore the fact that you have to feed the hungry and clothe the poor
mm-hmm,
and all of those things. So I think it's a contrast where there's like the divergence between a Christianity that is about the building up of the ego or of the
mm-hmm,
nation or of whatever other idol you want to build up with Christian language, and then there's a Christianity that will break you down, that will
mm-hmm,
break down your desire to puff yourself up above others
yeah,
and kind of call you to that, like it's kind of like the mystical letting go that we all have to do
mm-hmm,
anyways,
yeah,
and that we're going to be called to do at the very end, you know.
absolutely,
At the very end, I don't think anyone would argue that the idea is that it's going to be a matter of like, oh well, how much PR did you get,
mm-hmm.
for
How many likes? How
Christianity?
many
Yeah,
followers? How many subscribers did you get? Or how many bombs did you drop on innocent children?
right.
That will be
How
a
did you?
question, I think, but
Yeah, actually, that one is,
your
yeah,
your
that
your
one's on the
answer,
test.
hopefully you have the right answer for that one because
That
let
one
me tell you.
is going to be on the test, I'm afraid.
But yeah, I think this is why practices like fasting, like increasing our prayer, are all so important because of the world we live in. I mean, I do think we need to increase our prayers. Prayers for peace, prayers for, roads to dialogue, prayers for the ability to listen to one another with open hearts. Like, we do need more of those prayers. Fasting? Yeah, we definitely need more of the fasting, especially the fasting that God calls for in the scriptures to let the enslaved go free, to loosen their chains, to feed the hungry. We're so in need of all of those things. And so our world today, what's that song you sent me? The world is crying out for love. I think that is our world, and these practices ultimately help us to connect more with that world and better serve it. We're still in need of improvement and God's grace, lots of God's grace.
Oh, yeah.
On a lighter side, I mean, we're pretty much at the end of our second episode. And the Oscars are tonight. Technically, I don't know when we're going to post this. Probably later. So the Oscars were the other night when you're watching this, but we were thinking of ending the episode with a little movie talk.
Right.
Just to lighten the mood. You know, I have to say, I'm a big movie buff. People who follow me on Twitter might know, like, I really like movies. I do the AMC stubs, where you get to see, like, a stupid amount of movies for free every month with a monthly fee. But I have to say, 2025 really disappointed me. There were a handful of movies that I thought, you know, were entertaining, I liked. But for the most part, I don't think there were many, if any, like, masterpieces of 2025. A lot of people are raving over One Battle After Another, and they want that movie to win all the awards. I saw it, and I must be missing what everyone is saying about it, because I think it's totally overrated. In fact, you know, it has this, like, air of being about, like, helping migrants or helping the poor or whatever, because they're, like, revolutionaries. But, like, first of all, I don't quite know what their cause is, because they murder people. One of the characters does, at least. And at the end of the day, One Battle After Another is still a movie about two white men fighting over black women. And it's just, I don't think it sends the message it thinks it's sending.
You know, and this is a completely, like, out of nowhere one for me, because I haven't even heard of this one. And
It's
I'm not like you, like, I'm not up to date with all of these. So.
yeah, Leonardo DiCaprio. It was his movie of like the one he starred in, and him and his love interest. I'm not sure if they're married or not. They're like revolutionaries. Again, you're not really sure what they're fighting for. They're like, you know, Viva la Revolution. Okay, well, what is the revolution? You robbed the bank and killed somebody. I don't know what that is. And you have this, like, military guy who is clearly a racist, but also in denial about it, because he's attracted to this woman who's black, and then I think they were trying to kind of expose something about, like, racism in our culture. There's this whole, like, secret society of St. Nicholas or something like that, that's like these white supremacists who I guess run the government. I'm not really sure. But again, I really don't think they executed that message properly, because at the end of the day, not much happened. Like, Leonardo DiCaprio is still a bad dad, and they're still criminals. Like, I don't know what's very appealing. Nobody in that movie, no character is that really empathetic that I'm like, oh yeah, I really relate to these characters. Like, no, they were all weird. They were all messed up. So anyways, that would not be my recommendation. I think Hamnet deserves Best Picture, Best Actors, or whatever. Hamnet was phenomenal. I also loved Marty Supreme. I think it's just a fun movie and very well done. The music is awesome. Honestly, my pick of 2025, which isn't even in the Oscars this year, is a Chinese film, animated. It's called Neja 2. And it might be one of the best animated movies ever. It was basically Kung Fu Panda if Peter Jackson directed it. It was awesome. Highly recommend Neja 2. That would be my pick of the year. So,
Okay.
How about you? What movie did you like?
No, I
You
was
didn't
telling
see
you,
any movies.
I'm not a big movie watcher, and I don't really
Okay.
get up to date with the things. I told you the only one that I saw that might be like in the running or whatever, and I don't even know if it
Yeah.
is what is it, the horror one, the
Sinners. Sinners is
no,
definitely.
I haven't seen
Oh,
Sinners.
weapons, weapons, weapons.
Weapons, that one.
That was probably it. Definitely in my top five. One of the best of 2025. Weapons.
Yeah, I thought it was, and maybe I'm like way off on this. I thought it was a metaphor for like the gun control stuff.
Yeah, school shootings and stuff.
Right.
That's what I thought.
That's what I was
What
like.
else explains that random dream Josh Brolin
Yes.
has, where a giant AR-15 is like hovering above the house?
Yes.
That's the only possible connection I can make.
It was weird because I thought I was like way off because I told you I was watching it with some people and then it ended and I said something about it being about that and I was like, oh well, I think and they were like, I don't know, like how'd you even get to that? And I
What?
was like, well, how do you not like it seems pretty obvious that there's a correlation there.
It's one classroom. Everyone except one kid in that classroom disappears. All the parents are like, how could this happen? It doesn't make any sense. Yeah, school shootings don't make sense. You
Right.
go in one day, and then the next day, none of your classmates are in class. Like, that's that's what they were alluding to. And all the parents being like, I don't get it. It must be your fault. It must be your, like, yeah, who do you blame in a school shooting when the school shooter shoots himself? Like, to me, that is exactly what that movie was about. And witches.
Witches.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the witch.
Oh, you mean like the actual like supernatural
Right,
stuff
right.
and
There was also witches, but, the
there
deeper
was also
meaning,
some witchcraft in there.
the
That's
deeper
right.
meaning is about guns.
Right. It's loudly about guns and then subtly about witches.
Totally. The witch part is the most subtle part about the whole movie. Yep.
That's right. Once you see that character, you're like, of course.
That was a great one. Also, Friendship, a comedy with Tim Robinson and Paul Rudd.
I saw
Fantastic.
trailers for that one, but I didn't see it.
Fantastic. That was the only film I saw in 2025 where, like, the whole theater was just having a good time. We were all laughing. Uh, we were making comments. Like, the whole theater was in on these comedians. So that was a really good one, too. Highly recommend. So, but I guess we'll
Yeah, like
see.
I said, I don't have any things to add to
Oh,
the
you're
list.
just some ascetical monk out here in the wilderness. No technology, no movies, no
Well, it's
TV.
not. I literally don't have a TV, so that part does check out. But
Yeah,
yeah,
but everything's streaming now. Who needs a TV when you have your phone?
that's true. You don't even need a
Don't
TV.
even need one. You know what I need? A DVD player because I have all these DVDs and I nothing to play them on.
You still.
I collect them.
Wow, you're
I got a
really.
big binder. It's like this thick. I'm real into physical media. I think streaming is going to be a crash at some point. This it can't sustain all these
You're
streaming
such an
services.
old man. You're such an old man with this stuff. You're always
What?
like when we were talking about, and this one I agree with you on, but when we were talking about AI, and you're like these robots, and you're gonna see, and I mean I agree with you, but at the same time you do sound like the oldest person.
I know, and I can't help it anymore. Like I just accepted it. Like I didn't even realize there were AI apps. Like I didn't realize ChatGPT had an
Yeah, it's a
app.
thing. It's a thing.
That's how behind I am in terms of my use of AI. And I'm not like it's past. Like the time passed for me. Like I can't jump on now, and I'm not going to. So for me, I'm probably never going to use AI again. And I'm already that old man who's like, so do you kids use AI? I asked all the college students when they come, and they're like 6 years younger than me. Like they're not much not much
But
younger than me.
you're still, yeah,
I'm in
you're
my
still in
20s
your
still,
20s.
technically,
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm just doomed to be an old, grumpy man. But, oh well, it's my fate.
I think you were already that when we met,
Yeah,
be honest.
exactly.
This has been kind of your vibe. It's just a matter of kind of growing into your personality as time goes on, you know.
That is true. I mean, I've basically already hit my midlife crisis in my 20s, so I'm already over that.
Hey, don't speak too soon there. You might get a big one later.
That is true. At
You
least I
never
won't
know.
have to grapple with losing my hair.
Oh yeah, no,
I
that's
figured that out real quick.
that's the thing I was gonna ask you at the beginning is
Huh.
have you ever used one of these like those like electric ones with the circles that you just kind of go like that?
Yeah, I've used them before. Either way, I still shave my head. So I'll use an
With a
electric, like
razor.
right now I need to. I'll use an electric razor on this, and then when I go into the shower, I'll shave with a real razor. So I
Oh, so
just
you
get it
do it
as
like
thin as
both.
possible, and then I shave it with a razor.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right.
yeah. That's my technique. Feel free to use it anytime you want.
I think I will. I think you know you have. I believe that you have a better method. You know, so I'll adopt that. Yeah.
It's just the method I use. That's all. Not better or worse.
Yeah. I remember the first time you shaved your head
Yeah, I think we
because I
took
was there, and
pictures.
it was just a random thing you decided to do that day,
Because
and you
all
were
of
like,
you were like, you need to shave your head. Like, it's time, man. Shave your head. Just do it. Just do it. And I was like, screw it. I'll do it.
"Did we peer pressure you into shaving your head?"
No, but I think you were like, just do it, And I was like, screw it. I'm gonna shave it off. And I did, and it was the best
And you did.
decision I ever made.
You never looked back. Yeah, I sent you when I first did it.
Yeah.
And I think it was like I think it was the first day of the novitiate. And I don't think I should have been sending you anything because they were like, I
You weren't supposed to be using technology.
wasn't supposed to be using technology anyway.
That's hilarious.
And,
Well, I
all
think we're
right,
at the end of our episode.
we're concluding.
We
Yeah.
are concluding.
Yep. Blessings on all our listeners, all our ecumenical various walks of life.
Yep. We're gonna find a name for all of you. Monkheads or something, or
Monkheads.
you know, monk. Not well, yeah, monkheads. I like that one. So monkheads, tune in next time. Episode 3 coming your way. What is it
Yep.
about? Who
We
knows?
totally know what it's about.
Only God knows, and
We've
us.
really planned this out, okay? All right, we're not just going blindly into it. This is all mapped out. There's
Everything's
a
scripted.
it's so analyzed and it's just
We're that good.
yeah.
All right, folks. See you next time.